Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Alpha, Kilo, Delta, Nevada, Nevada, Mike, Lima,
Yankee, Hotel, Foxtrot,
Omega,
Yankee, Hotel, Foxtrot,
Here and now, ever and always, I choose my path. I am the arbiter of my destiny. I am born of what was. I am built from what came before me, but I am not ruled by it. I am the one who decides. I am the one who rules in the present. I am the one who chooses the weight and measure of my past. I am the one whose direction lies forward. I am the one who gains the skills I need to be and do what I choose to be and do. I am the one who decides what is important to me. I claim my human birthright as a magician. I claim my birthright as an avatar of the ineffable. I choose the road I walk, and I walk it in full knowledge that I have chosen it. I walk it knowing that I alone can walk it, and that I alone can choose another path. I take full and complete responsibility for my actions from this moment forward. Here and now, ever and always, I choose my path. That is from 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, spiritual, esoteric, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for spiritual practice in your life can be one of them, especially if you do this in an accountable way. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests say on this show. How will we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things, after all? Unlike those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often will revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence. Alright, very excited to welcome back author, magician, and friend of the show, Aidan Wachter. He's been a guest several times here before, and may actually now hold the title for most times returning as a guest to the Lux Occult podcast. In the past, we've discussed topics such as Aidan's books, 6 Ways, Changeling, Weaving Fate, as well as getting into some of the mechanics of hypersigils and the method for using journaling to do hypersigils called the Black Book, which Aidan lays out in Weaving Fate. And we've also talked about just general practical magic, dirt sorcery, sigil work, and much more. Today I'm very excited to be speaking with Aidan about a new Black Book hyper sigil project called After the Fall, which is a sort of magical future optimism operation that will be a collaborative effort among people looking forward at what a better future might involve for everybody. Telling ourselves and others better stories about the future and the world. In addition to looking forward, we're also going to be looking back and taking a little trip down memory lane as Aidan shares about being part of a Temple of Psychic Youth access point and more. You might have heard Tom Banger and I discuss Temple of Psychic Youth in episode 96. In addition to other episodes which Aidan has been a guest, 96 would be a pretty good companion to this one. That one is titled Retrospective. And in producing today's episode, I had the occasion to do my own sort of retrospective back on making the show and some of the episodes that Aidan has joined me for. So Aidan was one of the earlier guests that I had on. I think it was like episode 12. And it was really interesting to revisit that first conversation and kind of take note of what's changed and what hasn't. For instance, I think back then I hadn't really gotten into playing around with astrological magic, which is now something that, I don't know, I like to fuck around with. So yeah, that's one thing that's changed, but there's a lot that hasn't. We talked pretty soon after the book Weaving Fate came out, and there's a pretty good discussion of the Black Book hypersigil technique in it, which in addition to Weaving Fate, people would find useful if they want to participate in After the Fall, which you will hear about in our interview. Looking back, it was kind of spooky how relevant so much of what we talked about, even back in episode 12, has become to kind of what's happening now in the world and everything. I saw this meme the other day that said, "We knew the fascists were coming. What we didn't know is that they would be such losers." All right, stoked to get into another awesome chat with Aidan Wachter, but real quick, let me remind you that if you like the show or the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me, and there are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is already doing this stuff. Your support makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the time that I spend. I really appreciate the opportunity to be making this thing, and having the resources necessary to reach you all is an integral part of that equation, so thanks so much to the support making that possible. Although I'm an extremely introverted person, and I don't use social media very much due to this, I certainly love hearing from people for the listener mailbag segment. You can get me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com. Find me on Blue Sky at luxestrada919, or you can also find me on Instagram, where I don't post very often anymore, at Lux Occult Pod. Alright, so Aidan and I discussed some pretty intense stuff here today, having to do with current events and politics, and some of the stuff might be kind of like uncomfortable or activating or other things like that. So there's a lot of rough stuff happening right now. We don't really try to sugarcoat that. But we do talk about what we're doing as magicians and magically inclined folks to navigate it. So I'm hoping that people listening will take extra good care of themselves and do what is best for their own well-being, whether that means taking breaks or whatever. We will be here waiting if you need to take a pause for some self-care or whatever comes up. I'm going to be back to make a short correction and also to share some context and historical disambiguation during a break. But for now, so stoked to get into my latest conversation with Aidan Wachter. Greetings. Well, my guest once again today is Aidan Wachter. Aidan, welcome back.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I am persisting and resisting. We were kind of talking about this before I hit record, and sort of the idea of just putting one foot in front of the other is kind of a mantra these days for me, as things definitely feel very like overwhelming in a lot of ways. But yes, we persist and we resist. So yes.
Absolutely.
How are you?
It's this is probably the most actively difficult time I've had in trying to kind of stay grounded through all of this to the last, in its extreme form, I guess it's 10 years, but practically it's been, much longer, which will, I think, relate to some of the stuff we're talking about today. But kind of finding my way through, and very happy that I'm around people that are also in it and being active in it, and trying to figure out kind of what are the best ways to actually operate when you're magical folks and neurodivergent, and probably not necessarily viable for a coherent frontline job.
Yeah.
Because you're not that stable.
Yeah, and if you are those things, then you might, very for very good reasons, feel like you've got a little bit of like a target on your back or something like that too these days. So, I mean, yeah, there's lots of challenges to contend with.
Yeah, I'm a little amused that I'm doing my first kind of conference presentations ever at Sacred Space in College Park, Maryland. So I'm flying into DC in 3 weeks, and that's like such a weird concept right now.
Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about that conference and I'm regretting that I'm not going to be able to make it, but it also feels like a really good time to stay close to home too.
Yeah, the allies are all like, it'll probably be okay. So
It seems
it'll
like it's going
probably
to
be
be a
okay.
really, really cool, there's a lot of cool people going. Everybody's super stoked about it. So I think it's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be excellent. I look forward to meeting Ron and Laura Tempest Zakroff and a lot of other folks there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think Mortellus is going to be there and yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like it's going to be really cool. So fuck yeah. Well, shout out to everybody attending Sacred Space. Fuck yeah, hope it's dope. This might actually come out after it's out. So we'll see. But so I hope it was a good time if this does come out concurrently or
I'm
after.
sure it was. I'll speak for myself. It was fabulous.
Fuck
Everything
yeah.
I could hope for.
So you've got a lot of new stuff going on. We were also going to talk a little bit about some of your time with Temple of Psychic Youth. People might
Yeah.
remember the conversation that I had with Tom Banger about some of his experiences. I know he was a lot more deeply involved and for longer than you were, but I would love to hear sort of a little bit of your experiences. And it sort of occurs to me that we look back in time at like Margaret Thatcher's Great Britain and sort of the currents that were going on there in terms of like where TOPY grows out of. And there are sort of some parallels that we might be able to draw with what we see in the US right now. So there's some interesting stuff there, I think. And yeah, you've got some new work out that I'm stoked to hear about, and you're working
Yeah.
on some other stuff as well. And so yeah, lots of stuff to cover here. Where would you like to go first?
I think the Topi thing is a good place to start because it kind of sets we can move through the timeline.
Okay, fuck yeah.
And so I would actually start, as anybody knows me, I'm like kind of I'm wed to story because I think story is really important because it provides context. And so though retrospectively I tended to think that I wasn't particularly a political punk, I was also like heavy into MDC, the Dead Kennedys, the Dicks, and for folks that don't know the Dicks, note the time and listen to the song "Hate the Police." And I was influenced by British stuff, so Angelic Upstarts, things like that were kind of, so there was that kind of whole sense that there was this kind of rise of a whole bunch of politic that was not good. And in that, one night, the other group of weirdos in my town dropped a book of matches on the table in the cafe me and my friends were hanging out in with their phone number on it. And me and my friend Aaron called them and they said we should come over. And so we drove over and we got stopped by the cops on the way and they took our alcohol and dumped it and let us go because it was a different time. And we got there and it was like maybe like 5 or 6 people. I want to say it was 1 or 2 brothers whose house it was, and their mom was in and out. I was the youngest. I was 15 or 16, and everybody else was kind of 3 to 5 years older than me, pretty much. And they were the first people I ever met who were actively into industrial. Like I had some Throbbing Gristle on cassette that somebody had made me. And so I remember they made us waffles and we all sat around and, chain smoked and got high. And then they put on Force the Hand of Chance by Psychic TV. And I had never heard nothing like that before. And I was very much like, okay, I got to go get this album. But you couldn't get it in my town. So I went into Berkeley and found it. So I used to have a very lovely, Japanese import of that that I think I gave to my son at some point. And from that, me and another friend wrote for more information. And at that time, you would buy these things called international reply coupons at the post office that basically covered postage for whatever you would get back. And so if you're buying cassettes and stuff through magazines and things, often it would be like, send 2 of these and we'll send this out to you. And so we got the Gray Book from TOPY. I was kind of immediately hooked on the fact that they were talking about kind of magic, which I was already interested in, but hadn't really found a workable framework with, and kind of this social and political deconstruction. And like there was weird shit there that was never like my side of TOPY, as far as what I cared about, but like there was a lot of stuff kind of connected to Jim Jones and Charles Manson, which while being what we now kind of think of in some ways as edgelordy, it was also like kind of commentary that is this that different from what society indoctrinates us into, or is this really just kind of maybe a particularly obvious form, right?
Sure.
This kind of cult of personality and cult of power. And so they were a big influence on me from 82 onward. And then in 87, I got Liber Null and Psychonaut when it came out. And I was living in the mountains at that time. And shortly thereafter, I moved with my partner and our kid to Oakland, just on the Berkeley-Oakland border. And I knew people because I joined the OTO up in the mountains at Thelema Lodge. And so they connected us to a house that was 5 houses up from Thelema Lodge. So we were on the same block. And one of the people that was at that kind of gathering out in the suburbs a few years before that turned me on to Force the Hand of Chance was, I believe at that time, the lodge master of Thelema Lodge. If not, he was on his way into becoming the lodge master. So I knew him. And so I was kind of doing the OTO thing, but really viewing it through kind of my own take on chaos magic as a lens. Still getting stuff in from the temple and buying the records, and I'd see some of the publications, but not a lot. And then this crew of people showed up from Louisiana, and something like 4 of them were all in the temple. And I knew other people that were in the temple, but it just hadn't clicked until this particular crew came in. And at that point, I actually did start sending in sigils and kind of directly affiliating. And for me, TOPY was very much, how do we move beyond the direct kind of protest as activism into how do we actively kind of deconstruct our own cultural conditioning so that we can recognize it when we see it out there in the world, in an effort to kind of what we would now kind of maybe say is kind of like, how do you begin to decolonize your mind from all this bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what TOPY was about. I don't believe that's what it was for everyone, but that was super interesting. And I also liked it as it was really the first place in kind of magical zones where people were comfortable really kind of cutting loose. Like the OTO, even though the Thelema Lodge was pretty loose and functionally at that time run by a psychic youth as well, you still had the structure of the OTO sitting on it and kind of that structure of ceremonial magic pretty heavily there. And then the kind of pagan scene there was, you know, you're kind of looking at Nerugd, which is the New Reformed Orthodox Order of the Golden Dawn, the Covenant of the Goddess, and Reclaiming were kind of the big population-wise groups. But also, you know, though I wasn't smart enough to realize that they were still there, you know, just up the road from me were Victor and Cora Anderson, who founded the fairy tradition. Yeah. So there was all that stuff. And so there was a lot of politics going on, but it was very much, to me, as I saw it as like a very young person, kind of focused on let's get out in the streets and protest directly, which I did. But magically, I've always been more interested in how do you kind of go after the underlying power structures, and how do you, like, contagion works both ways. And so can you do stuff that maybe corrupts those corrupting influences to damage their power? So that was a big piece of it for me. But a lot of it was just like, this is a space where I can really experiment. And people are open to the madness of what I might pull out. It wasn't a space like where somebody would Like I can imagine now where people are so fucking opinionated about the right way to do shit. Like if I were to post, if I had pictures and could post my altar space from when I was in living in the access point for TOPY NorCal, like the horror would be like what the fuck is going on here? This is a complete fucking clusterfuck and actually wrong and incorrect in all these ways.
I'm deeply offended by how you've chosen to set up your altar. Yes.
Totally, because it's like funny. One of my friends like totally pegged me at one point, like walked in and looked at my fucking room, and they're like, "I think you practice Icelandic voodoo, right?" And this is this is like totally offensive now. But it was just like, what's the vibe language for this? Because it was heavily into runic work and sigil work, but a lot of sorcery that was influenced from my very limited understanding of, and not even trying to borrow from those things directly, just like there were aesthetic pieces that made sense that the kind of, and I still think, and no offense if it turns your screw, it's just an art, turns your crank, it's an art thing. I can't think personally of anything that speaks less to magic to me than kind of the Golden Dawn style of ritual spaces. It just is like, no, I've always needed to have like natural materials and kind of chaos.
Yeah, I think that actually makes sense too, just given that you were kind of attracted to something like Topi's current, like we fast forward in time and see the Golden Dawn doing this like pro-Trump magic later. So, there could
Oh,
be
I didn't even
something
know
there.
about that.
Oh, yes, unfortunately, this has been the case. As in a response to Michael M. Hughes's operation to bind Trump, I think it was like back in
Yeah,
2017, around there.
yeah.
As a response, the Golden Dawn did some counter magic to protect. So that kind of gives us a little bit of like a lay of the land of this like political landscape, I suppose.
3, Romeo, 2.
Greetings, it's me, Luxa from the future. I wanted to pop in here with a quick correction. While it is the case that occultism is unfortunately not immune from creepy right-wing ideologies creeping into the little nooks and crannies of places that otherwise seem like they would be chill or neutral from the outside, you can check out my conversation with Spencer Sunshine about Satanism and the far right to hear more about that. I did want to mention that it was not the whole of the Golden Dawn who conducted these operations that I mentioned, but it was rather those with a lot of name recognition associated with the organization. So apologies for the conflation there, and thank you so much for listening. Let's dive back in. Cheers.
4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
Yeah, and so that was kind of, and so I became involved with the temple, and then a bunch of us moved. Some who lived in Thelema Lodge, some that were just kind of knew the TOPY folks that I met that came in from Louisiana that time, and me and my partner, we all moved to the corner of Haight and Divisadero in San Francisco, on top of a Thai restaurant called Phuket Thai, which everybody there knows as Fuck It Thai. And that was the NorCal access point, because my friend Mark had asked if he could run the access point. And so we did a lot of shit in there, and it was generally really chaotic and really disorganized, but it was actively interesting and it was actively experimental, which really worked for me. There was stuff that there was a lot that didn't work for me. But it didn't really matter. It was like, okay, it wasn't like you have to be involved in the stuff that you're not interested in. There was none of that going on. And then there were a bunch of other psychic youths around. And through that, we had a couple of, US gatherings at that place. I met Tom actually at a crash worship show. That was the first time I met Tom. And my main memory of Tom at that time was that we were having some fucking super heady conversation with somebody, and Tom spat out like, "I'm just trying to figure out why the CIA assassinated Bon Scott." And I was like, "Okay, this is who this guy is," and I thought that was good. So through that, I ended up meeting, Alora and Jen. Never got close with them, but I put on a kind of an event for them that got them, the money to come into the US, and I spent some time with them in Brighton one summer. But that was kind of my second to last attempt at kind of being in group. And so when Jen decided to kind of shut down TOPY, I was just kind of like, whatever. And later I joined the IoT, but for a little while. But and so TOPY was interesting because to me, as I experienced, it was this very open space to play, and it was overtly anti what I would now call it empire, kind of the power of empire, in a strange way, because it was almost looking at those structures. I don't even know how I would describe that. I think it was like, I don't know that TOPY ever really proposed solutions to anything, but it did put forward that there could be a different way of kind of organizing ourselves, at least for magical folks. And kind of retrospectively now, it's very funny to me because like the first one of the documents that came in, there was a little flyer that came in when I bought the Gray Book. And one of the things I remember about it is that they were talking about that it was creating like a modern pagan something, I don't remember what the language was, without recourse to gods or demons. Which is very funny because there's one way that I can see that as making sense, but then I was also like, I think as an animist that wouldn't have connected to me at this point,
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, I can understand it, but I can also understand that it's limiting, I think.
Yeah. And so it was weird. And so now retrospectively, I can see a lot of different things there. I've talked to a number of friends who were women that were in it, and some of them had great experiences, some really did not. Very typical kind of male sexual power games going on in some places. And so I think it's kind of retrospectively, I guess, kind of knowing what I know now of that stuff, it's a very mixed bag to me, but I think it was a really interesting project. And Genesis and Alora in particular were always extremely good to me. And for all the folks that I know that knew them somewhat well, that was pretty universal. That was universal as far as I know. And it really was. I think it's like it was kind of, there was a chunk of us that were kind of like, there's this kind of neo-pagan, goddess-centered, Wicca-driven thing. And for people that didn't live there, like pretty much all witchcraft was functionally under the Wicca umbrella at that point in time. That was public. Like people talk about Paul Husson, but Paul Husson is still heavily influenced by that. And if you were looking to find groups, that's what you found. Like Anderson was the only thing in the Bay Area that we would now qualify as traditional witchcraft because it really operated outside of that. And even then, things like reclaiming seemed to me like they picked up more of that stuff too. Though somebody like Theo Getty Parma might know more than that about me because I'm not, deep in that stream. And it really was just saying like, why it was, I think it was kind of looking at the fall of the counterculture from the 60s and trying to pull that out of the 70s, kind of what had survived into a new form explicitly magically into the 80s as kind of a counter to the rise of conservatism in Britain and the US. And definitely to me, retrospectively, there's a lot of it that's really funny. It's just like, wow. So like edgy to be edgy, that side of the punk rock that I now like kind of look at and go, oh, what the fuck, that's kind of ridiculous. But it was super good for me.
Yeah, hell yeah. Well, that all makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for walking me down this trip to memory lane. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, are there any sort of like I don't know, when you think back on this time, like, are there any sort of like key little pieces that you think you might have carried forward with you? Like, is there sort of maybe some like little touchstones there that come up?
I think my kind of continuous push towards using magic as a deconditioning tool, as being one of the most critical uses of it. Like there are people that kind of view that as like that is the thing you could do with it. And to me, that's almost like the first thing you should do with it, and you shouldn't stop. That's the biggest thing, is that it gave me language around understanding that the whole function of societies is to kind of produce kind of a continuity of programming. And that as we've moved deeper and deeper into the modern world, we can really see how extreme that is because we can see it shift so fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if we look at what's going on really explicitly right now on the streets in the US, yes, it has its roots in Reagan, but I would almost peg its like ultra specific roots in Gamergate.
Okay,
And
yeah,
and
that's
and,
interesting.
and then in the kind of wars around the awards in the science fiction world.
Hmm.
Like, why are we giving this to Black women when we just want more Robert Heinlein?
That is a great point. I hadn't even considered that. But yes, the kind of really kind of violent pushback that we've seen against maybe just some kind of basic strides towards a more equal situation for people has really been alarming and disheartening for sure.
Right, because we can kind of see that channel from kind of Gamergate and then whatever that was. I don't know whether that was Hugo Gate or Nebula Gate or both. Whatever got named on through kind of into the incel movement on into this kind of tech bro. Let's scoop those people up and give
Yeah,
them somebody to hate and
yeah.
give them something to belong to.
And
And
there's
you go,
unfortunately,
that's all conditioning. It's
yeah,
like
absolutely.
this is for a lot of folks, I think, that haven't looked at it that way. It's hard because you think that there's a particular kind of rational thought that lies behind it, which isn't really true in a lot of cases. That's always the limited thing. Most of what we believe because we've been trained to believe it,
Mhm.
and we've accepted that. And I think that Toby kind of spoke to that in some ways, maybe not super overtly. I don't remember. I didn't save any of that material, so I haven't really looked at any of it for a long time. But and so to me, that has always been one of those things is I've kind of looked at everything and went like, even when I blew up in the IoT, it's like I could see that kind of shift towards moving more towards kind of narratives of control
Mhm.
in the US section. That was for me at that point such a huge red flag. I was just like, done.
Yeah,
I'm out. Not playing
yeah.
anywhere that's going on. Because I don't believe in fighting it head on because I think that always just entrenches it.
I think that's probably the case. So for TOPY, at least as far as I kind of like remember and understand it, like a big way that they played with deconstruction, in addition to kind of like challenging gender norms and stuff of the time, like they played a lot with language. Like the
Yes.
idea that language was a huge, and this is actually you could look at a lot of different through a lot of different lenses as kind of make the same case. Like you could talk about hypnosis or advertising or all kinds of other ways that this is, demonstrable that language is this really sort of powerful way of changing what's in a person's mind. And so I think, language is obviously a great place to look if we're like wanting to do this type of work. How are we talking about ourselves? How are we thinking about ourselves, our own magical practices? What type of vocabulary are we using to describe it? But I'm curious, in terms of this type of deprogramming, like what type of kind of praxis does that entail for you, do you think?
Mostly it's trying to become and maintain awareness because it's very difficult, I think, because it's so, I want to say insidious, but that makes it more intelligent than it is. It's more so prevalent that it's kept me out of kind of aligning with almost any narratives that are kind of widespread. And so it's one of the reasons that I've kind of played with redefinition around things quite a lot, and why I kind of still hunt language that it's intentionally questionable, because I want people to question it. And there's a lot of times where if I'm putting something out in the world, I'm watching like, am I trying to produce a reaction? And if I am, does what I'm creating actually do that? Or am I venting? Right? And I try not to vent, except, among people who understand I'm venting and if that's what's going on. And I would say kind of currently, a way to look at that is looking at what happens or has been happening on the right, and kind of specifically because of the power of tech and social media. A lot of this started with talk radio, and then it moved into podcasts and YouTube and all this stuff. Is like looking at where the kind of forces of control, which is what I'm going to put the right R's, kind of control and othering is how I would define the right, or control through othering. They've become very adept at intentionally co-opting and then corrupting terminology. And this is really important, and it's one of those things that I think, like, I don't think you can, like, I've had this talk with people who are like, you shouldn't you can't use woke in the original meaning of the word, because now it's been corrupted. And I'm kind of like, no, take it back. Mm-hmm. And this is something that queer folks have done extensively. For example, in realizing that if you seed language as a meaningful thing, that words do have meanings, and that just because a louder voice has tried to change that meaning, if you exceed that, then you can't talk about what you need to talk about, which is part of the process, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one way that I'm always looking at it. Like, am I allowing the narratives of kind of the forces of empire to disempower my own narrative kind of abilities? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. It reminds me also of the classic 1984 by Orwell, in which he really gets into the way that authoritarian regimes deal with language and co-opt it in much the way we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and so, like, it's really interesting. Like, so as we're writing this, that things are insane in Minneapolis, and the U.S. government is kind of attempting to reframe anyone in opposition at all to it as domestic terrorists.
So like 60 or 70% of the country is now a terrorist because they don't like what's happening. Yeah.
Right.
How's that going to work, right? Like,
right, which is a great error, right? You go, this is a thing that this is a move they should not have made, but they're not very smart. It makes the word
meaningless now.
Because they're going to do the thing that they've done around things like woke to themselves, into their own pet terminology, and then all of a sudden you go, wait a second, if everybody's a terrorist, then
what does that word even mean?
What does that even mean?
Yeah,
because we thought this meant people who blew up buildings.
Yeah, we thought this meant people who, for political reasons committed acts of violence, right? Like, that's different than taking a picture of somebody with your phone.
Right. And so I think that, to me, that deconditioning piece and the language piece, and TOPY did play with that. I never kind of got into kind of I probably did it a little bit, but I never got serious into the kind of, let's use alternate spellings kind of as an in-language, because I was never super interested in the in-language concept. And you and I have probably talked about this a lot, is one of the things is that all of these things are kind of natural human behaviors. that can be weaponized. It's like when I talk about cultural conditioning, functional societies do this across the board. They've just worked out systems that actually work, and they very carefully raise up and indoctrinate and support people within that kind of set of values and kind of what Tyson Yucca Porter refers to among the Aboriginal folks as lore, right? But it's got deep history and it's provable. It's not made up, which is the thing that I think people get fucked up about, because there's nothing wrong with that kind of social it's what constructs a society, right?
It's part
And
of
what
our
we
secret
have
sauce as social creatures. Like
is
we've
social
constructed
creatures.
these systems for a reason, yeah.
And so what we have now is kind of a co-opting and an intentional destruction of functional society to allow kind of mass levels of abuse and power grabbing and resource extraction, And so some of that is actually, it's in the work that I'm doing now. It's why I talk about empire, because then I explain empire as being kind of the pathology that lies beneath kind of narcissism and patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia and transphobia and xenophobia and all of these things, racism, sexism, because I'm interested in the whole thing, because I don't believe we can go after it piece by piece anymore. I think there was a time that could have worked where you go, okay, the issue here is kind of endemic racism, but now it's all of it, and it's all of it all at once. Which to me, I kind of view as potentially the upside of that is that screams kind of death throes of a system to me. It's like at the point that the system goes to war with everything, it's the point you're done, right? It's like it's kind of it's metastasized in all the systems, and you're desperately trying to figure out what's the cure, rather than going, okay, system's going down, And so I think that for me, again, if we look at this kind of idea of, and an important idea for me right now is kind of conceiving of functional society. Like, what would that look like? Because we are not going to go back to what point, whether we view that as 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, depending on who you are and who your people were and all that stuff and where you were. We won't go back to that, but we do have to begin seeing this very alternative narrative as possible. And I think, again, to just bring it back, I think I got that from TOPY. Like, I don't know if that's what they were really selling, but that's what I got.
Yeah, hell yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think, we have to sort of like imagine what something is going to look like in the future in order to create it. And to look back into the past, obviously that can be great for inspiration, but there's no way to return to the past. And our little like notions about what society looked like in the past are often like pretty erroneous when you compare them with the actual data. There's some interesting stuff out here about the actual like different ways that human societies have organized themselves in terms of like structures of power, and it hasn't always been we just are farmers and then we turn into cities, and like it's not really true when you actually look at the historical archaeological evidence. So there are a lot of like different ways that we could do this, and I think entertaining some of these like stories that are outside of our precious Western canon is really, really needed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's like I never can remember the name of it, but there was a huge city in the US before colonization that essentially became kind of the usual extractive coercive city state. So this is before we got here, they did it. But the interesting thing is that they abandoned that project.
Yeah.
And so it's like I've seen people argue like, see, we always do this, but they like skip that second piece. Like people became unimpressed and said, no, fuck you. I'm walking out of your little zone, because why would I do this way? There are options, and I'm going to go figure out what they are. And to me, that's the most interesting thing, or that's what I'm focused on right now, is kind of how do we generate those while addressing the immediate needs that are happening simultaneously. because I do think that for a lot of people, what they want is, and I don't know that, and it's an uncomfortable thing, and probably your listeners are not those who are kind of so heavily in this camp, but I know of a lot of people who are like, why can't we go back to how this was 20 years ago? And you go, look, 20 years ago it was fucked. 40 years ago it was fucked.
Yeah, I
60
mean,
years it was fucked.
we
80
all
years
we
ago it
got
was fucked.
here from somewhere, and if we just go back to how things were 20 years ago, in 20 years we'll just end up at the same place, right? I
Right.
mean,
And so you
isn't
have
that
to move to a view that is like got an entirely different value set. And that is about language, and it is about story, and it is about imagination. Like, okay, what would the value set be of a completely different way to organize society? Because that has to be the core of it. Because we're always going to have differences about how each of us kind of express individually within that. And we see where they've tried to kind of impose that on the outside in some, what we would refer to as, authoritarian communist situations. This is not what anybody, I think, with a brain is looking for. And so it has to be based on kind of like a core value set that's decided upon by the vast majority of the people. It's not fucking the 51 to 49 kind of action. That's never going to work. But that requires a willingness to look at where we are, how we got here, and then all the options that we can see all over the world, whether that's here previously, whether that's in anywhere in the world, and go, okay, so what can we learn from these things since we know we can't actually just go do that? Those things are not available to us, but there's a lot to be learned from it, which to me is, again, kind of why I push animism, because I think animist experience is like, it's like the best antibody to what I call empire. It's just like a big fuck now. And if you look at what has happened historically in kind of the disenfranchising and disempowering of different groups of people, that's because of that. How do you break kind of social power? Is you have to begin to get the shopkeepers to view the landowners as more on their side than the people who work the land.
Yeah.
And you have to disempower the women, and you have to disempower anybody that doesn't fit your little model. Because otherwise people don't want to be controlled. They don't want to live in shitty environments. And so, yeah, it's I think it's a pathology. I think empire is a pathological state that humans go into that has to be corrected.
Yeah, I agree. And sort of like on this note, especially in like looking at things like accelerationism or whatever, like there's a lot of talk about the way that libidinal forces are sort of harnessed in these ways of controlling people. Like I think that a lot of the gender politics that we see out of the right are kind of like an example of this, as sort of like quote unquote traditional gender roles. I put that in big air quotes because there's not a whole lot of like evidence to suggest that what they're saying is in any way like historically traditional, but it's their sort of like it's a sort of idea that they've built up a lot of like energy and focus, and like they're really excited and like horny about. Like I would consider this like very fetishistic. Like it's this kind of notion that they've really gotten really worked up about, and they're really like gung-ho for in a way that is really harnesses these like libidinal drives, I think. And I think that part of what's happening there is a sort of like an inability or a refusal to sort of like adequately like cope with those libidinal drives and to sort of like export them and have them be sort of projected outside so as to not have to like take accountability or responsibility for one's whatever kinky feelings. And I think that we can see this too in a lot of places on the right in terms of like the way that, how should I put this? The bootlicking that we see in terms of like kind of really wanting to feel like you're getting a pat on the back from your boss or your big mean government daddy or whatever it is. I think that this is another type of libidinal force, which it could be expressed in more healthy ways that could really empower an individual, or could be co-opted by control as has been done.
And well, and I think that's a good point. And it's also we're like in a really interesting period because I think that those drives, again, if we kind of pull them into a functional society, what I mean by functional society is one where what you do in any place, so that can be a house, or that can be a neighborhood, or that can be a city or a country, the things that you do on all levels are sustainable. They respect the kind of interconnection of us and land base and nature, and you're not extracting more than the carrying capacity wherever you are.
Mhm.
And so if we had like a functioning society, part of that comes out is it's not about it can't be about that idea of power over. Like, I am more powerful than you because I am in a body that most people perceive as male, right? Or that whatever, I am smarter and therefore I should have power over you. It shifts everything into interconnectedness and reciprocity and kind of a really extreme long view where you go, okay, sure, this would work as a thing one could do. We could cut down all the trees in Portland and use that for building materials. This has got bad side effects. Versus, could we begin looking at increasing biodiversity in Portland over time? Could we begin to figure out how we actually, and not as some kind of fucking forced social program, which is, again, what the right likes as ideas. Like, there's a bunch of folks who live outside here because they don't, not because most of them are not doing that fully willingly, but some are. And some of those folks, you go, what scenario would work for those folks? Really, some of them, wherein they could do that and be part of that functional society, right? I know there's someone that lives near a friend of mine that for a very long time was basically like mass gardening a vacant lot. And then at some point, somebody flipped out and got them booted from it. And you go, this is insane. There should be a structure where you go, yeah. Who else wants to do this?
Exactly.
Any
Yeah,
of you
this
guys want to
person is
fucking live on this
providing a
thing
service. Yeah,
and do this thing, And so it's how do you move from extraction and hoarding, which is the main kind of goal of the right, is how do we hoard everything? So we hoard power over everyone around us, and we view everything as either kind of antagonist or property.
Yeah, it's either to be dominated or destroyed,
or owned. Like, it's a really whack idea that they kind of preach this idea of individuality. But frequently, and ever more so, you go, yeah, but you own your children and you get to do whatever you want to them. And you own your partner if you're married, and you get to do whatever you want.
Individuality only applies to corporations, Aidan.
Exactly, and so this is clearly not functional, Anyway, but it's a very interesting thing. And so it's kind of, I guess for me, I'm kind of like interested in kind of how do you mass mobilize towards an idea of like, what's the core value? What's the core value for humans that want to survive and want the world to be well and want their children to grow up, not to have more money or a bigger house than them, but to grow into a world that is in better shape than the one that they're in right now. And if you can kind of refocus in that direction, which I think is just people talk about it. I know a lot of folks are like, yeah, but that's super fantasy. You go, well, how else do we survive? And I don't see a way. Because all of the kind of talk in other directions, I think, is nonsense. It's like it's the tech fantasy doesn't ever pay off. That's kind of how you define the tech fantasy.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's actually kind of like what's at the heart of the story of Prometheus, right? So yeah, we will eventually be consumed by our technology, right? The ancients kind of like understood this, or that was the danger of it, that we play with. So yes.
yeah.
Well, maybe we should shift gears towards, we're already sort of in the present time. So
3, Romeo, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
greetings, it's me, Luxa from the future again. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back soon with the rest of my discussion with Aidan Wachter, including hearing about the new collaborative Black Book Hypersigil project After the Fall, and more thoughts about steering one's ship through troubled waters. But now I wanted to pop in here and provide a little extra context and commentary. We have some international listeners and some people who, like me, tend to be sort of disconnected with the currents of popular culture. So I thought it might be helpful to offer some background about Gamergate and Hugogate, aka Puppygate, and other things spinning off from it. Aidan mentioned that Temple of Psychic Youth had this idea of looking at really extreme examples of cult dynamics, like what led to the Jonestown Massacre in 1978, where over 900 people were killed, for example, and comparing what we see in these, extreme examples with other parts of, say, popular culture. The strategy of gaining control through othering that Aidan mentioned is also actually a cult tactic called us versus them. In making these types of comparisons, TOPY was sort of ahead of their time because this idea has gained a lot of traction in modern assessments of culture. There's a book called The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control by Dr. Stephen Hassan, which gets into some of this stuff, as you might be able to tell from the title. It's an okay book. There are some issues I would take with it, which I actually do get into during a little presentation about, like, cult stuff and other dynamics that I did for the Green Mushroom Project a while back. This is kind of one of my weird areas of interest, which has weirdly become more relevant as time goes forward. But anyway, the book does offer some useful advice about how to approach loved ones who have become involved in a potentially harmful group dynamic, whether that's a political thing or a religious thing or a thing about people who get really, really into, rock climbing or whatever it is. So another example of, like, analyzing this stuff, and a much more, like, lighthearted one, is the work of author and podcast host Amanda Montell, who explores the culty aspects of pop culture with her co-hosts on the podcast Sounds Like a Cult, which is mostly a comedy show about stuff like Labubu. There is an episode of Sounds Like a Cult called The Cult of Incels, which features the guys from last podcast on the left, and I think listeners of this show might enjoy that episode, and as we can see from the article about Gamergate I'm about to share, it would probably be a useful sort of, like, add-on companion for those who hoping to, like, better understand some of the dynamics that Aidan and I kind of touch on here today. Complicated stuff, but there's a lot of work out there on it. So I'm going to read an article called A Very Brief History of Gamergate, which covers 2012 to 2016, written by Karen Pagel, which you can read on mediacommons.org. The social media harassment campaign Gamergate existed for only a few months during the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, but its origins and ramifications extend far beyond its most active period. Supposedly driven by an earnest desire to bring ethics to gaming journalism, the campaign paradoxically sought to achieve this goal through online attacks against women in gaming, with most of their ethical rage directed squarely at developer Zoe Quinn and media critic Anita Sarkeesian. The Gamergate campaign and its hate for these women seemingly erupted out of nowhere in the summer of 2014. However, the foundation for the campaign emerged in 2012 with two disconnected controversies that would later congeal into what we know as Gamergate. In March 2012, Anita Sarkeesian and her website Feminist Frequency became the subject of extreme online backlash in response to her Kickstarter campaign to fund her critical video game series, Tropes vs. Women in Video Games. The online responses themselves, unusual at the time but common today, set the bar for violent harassment with threats of rape and death against Sarkeesian, along with the creation of a video game called Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian that bloodily delivered on its promise. The so-called Doritos Gate controversy emerged several months later when players became outraged by the perceived coziness between game journalists, corporate sponsors, and the video game industry after a complicated and confusing series of tweets and articles involving journalists, a contest to win a PlayStation 4, and a writer who had once worked for video game publisher Square Enix. While these controversies gained some limited traction, both eventually receded out of the public consciousness with no apparent impact on the video game culture or industry. However, nearly a year and a half later, these two impulses converged when a man named Aaron Yoni published a blog post accusing his ex-girlfriend and video game developer Zodi Quinn of cheating on him with a Kotaku writer in exchange for a positive review of her game Depression Quest. The review, of course, did not exist, and would not justify Gamergate's behavior even if it had, but the accusation against Quinn and Kotaku apparently tapped into lingering rage from the Sarkeesian and Doritos Gate controversies. As a result of the accusations, Gamergate exploded online and metastasized from that original blog post to an all-out social media campaign against Quinn organized on 4chan, 8chan, Reddit, and Twitter. Because of the connection to Kotaku, the campaign felt emboldened to claim their actions as a defense of ethics in gaming journalism. But the disconnect between their ethics and their methods of violent harassment deeply undercooked the potential for positive changes in the industry that the campaign claimed it wanted. From August 2014 through approximately April of 2015, the Gamergate campaign systematically and relentlessly harassed prominent women in gaming, such as Quinn, Sarkeesian, developer Brianna Wu, and anyone brave enough to defend them. These attacks included anonymous online threats, doxing, and swatting, and eventually culminated in a bomb threat against a venue where Sarkeesian was scheduled to speak. After months of harassment and fury, Gamergate finally appeared to melt away back into the worst recesses of the video game community from which it came. Despite these appearances, continues Karen, the story and harassment of Gamergate did not end with the campaign against women in the video game community. Instead, much of the unsatisfied intensity of Gamergate reorganized into more explicitly right-wing actions far outside the video game sphere. The shift from gaming to politics was not entirely an organic move for the campaign, but rather one primarily abetted by one of the group's de facto leaders and alt-right political commentator, Milo Yiannopoulos. Yiannopoulos latched onto the burgeoning Gamergate campaign, most likely in an effort to propel himself to personal political stardom, and became the campaign's most vocal and prominent spokesperson and eventually acted as a conduit for the group's absorption into right-wing politics. Karen continues that when Gamergate died down in the gaming community, many of the Gamergate participants became involved in the right-wing anti-diversity campaign known as the Sad Puppies, and subsequently pushed the group's agenda against minorities in the science fiction community. Rather than dox and harass these targets, the group attempted to block the inclusion of minority authors from the Hugo Awards in 2015, which may have satisfied the campaign's gatekeeping impulses, but was fairly meaningless in the grand scheme of things. The further away from Gamergate proper the campaign traveled, the more dispersed and difficult it is to track its movement. However, there are indications that remnants of the Gamergate campaign, or at least its tactics and spirits, merged into the online campaign for Donald Trump's 2016 presidential bid and formed the foundation for the explosion of right-wing harassment and trolling that has proliferated in the years since. As the following pieces demonstrate, Gamergate may have failed to drive women from gaming, but its legacy of harassment and exclusion persists in the video game community and beyond. And then there's like a list of a bunch of sources about Gamergate's lasting impact, which you can go and check out if you want to read the article. There is a link to it in the show description. Thank you, Karen Pagel, who wrote that piece back in February of 2023. And I do think it does a nice job of sort of outlining exactly what Aidan was talking about regarding the sort of attitudes of, I don't know, self-imposed victimhood and subsequent actions of cry bullying. Those are my words that I think we're seeing. I did a little bit of poking around on some sci-fi fan forums to learn more about Puppygate. So something that a lot of people pointed out was that the Hugo Awards have always had a lot of like politics attached to them, which seems historically accurate. I actually make the case that there are aspects of politics attached to all areas of life. But the thing that's different these days is just the extent to which technology has facilitated these things happening just more quickly and on a broader scale. All right, lots more to get into here with Aidan Wachter, including discussion of necromancy or ancestor work, as well as about After the Fall, which is that collaborative Black Book Hypersigil project, which you can contribute to, and much more. After the interview, I will share about a community protection salt creation ceremony that I and some other people from the Green Mushroom Hyphosigil project will be conducting. And there's also going to be a track from a very cool project called Music for Good, which is a mixtape for Minnesota Mutual Aid. But now, leading us back into my chat with Aidan Wachter, I wanted to share a poem which was custom written for me by XYZ Arts back in the springtime of 2025. I was living in Orlando, Florida at the time, but I knew that we were going to have to leave pretty soon. As soon as possible. We were getting ready to leave. I was really sad about it, actually, because I had so many great friends there, and I really loved the heat and the sunshine and the thunderstorms. Really loved that. Even though it is sort of like a cheesy city, mostly run by the Disney Corporation, you can't spend 10 years finding friends and tiny diamonds in the rough of a place without sort of falling in love with it. I was on a sort of farewell tour of the city, visiting all of my favorite spots for what I assume will probably be the last time. And I was at a farmer's market where somebody was offering custom poems on any topic. So I decided to ask them to please write me a poem about justice, which they did. And I meant to share it on the show soon after, but as is often the case when you're moving, things got shuffled around, and the poem and the envelope it was in wound up getting tucked away, and only have recently resurfaced while I was working on producing this episode. And it feels like a nice little time capsule which has opened itself back up at the perfect moment. So shout out to XYZ Arts, and check out xyzartsllc.com to have your own custom poem written if you should need that for any of life's occasions. Alright, this is called Justice. May we strive for justice, not just us, all of us, and not just for ice, though it would be nice to melt its malicious mission, extending them forgiveness as they give us the freedom to be. And to whatever degree that feeds the feeling of healing, of ascension, creating balance with correction, a connection that will prevent them freezing people from their homes, may justice be for all, a lasting energy that is well known. Alright, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about what you've been working on.
So, I have this Patreon group and a Discord attached to it that is fucking awesome. And one of the upsides that some might view as a downside for me of that is that I actually feel like it's like my responsibility to come up with useful ideas, which is great because I think we need useful ideas. And given how crazy everything has got in the US, I've been kind of at a loss for useful ideas. Like, I'm continuously sharing, like, tools to kind of get your nervous system regulated, and basic magical practices to kind of get yourself and maybe your household as well as possible. But on a larger scale, everything seems kind of fucked up. Like, what do you do? And this is not to counter any of the active work against kind of the forces of empire, and I don't really care what format that takes. I'm not a purist about any of that. But my drive, again, as kind of coming in with this idea of kind of animism and the idea of functional society concepts, is always to go, okay, what happens next? Like, yes, there's shit that needs to stop, but it needs to stop on a really big scale. It's not enough that it goes back to the police just get to shoot black folks with immunity, right? That's not legit. And so one of the things that I shared the other day was maybe the suggestion to begin speaking to the ancestors, for those that have them, and kind of going directly at those who fought against fascism, or who knew people who did, who grew up in that time period, and really getting them on board and inviting them in. Because I don't know if you have an ancestor practice, but one of the things that I find comes up is they get very agitated about stuff like this. And so a lot of us know that there's a lot of major agitation there, but they also need help in to do anything about it. And they often feel very powerless, because not many of us in kind of the US in particular, won't speak for anywhere else, have direct connect with them. And so I began suggesting that as a thing that somebody might want to do. So actually ask your ancestors to reach out to others, and to send that, maybe send them to the people that are doing really fucked up shit they don't agree with. And not all of the ancestors will be into this, but you can just kind of focus on the ones that are. And I do this just energetically. It's I'm not so spirit sensitive that I can say, yes, this is my grandfather, and I'm doing this with him most of the time. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just asking them, go, hey, if you are down and you see that this is completely fucked up, kind of spread through the network of the dead, because the dead are mycelial as well as all the other spirits, and see what influence you can have on the people who are actively on the streets doing this shit everywhere. Be that in the Ukraine, be that in Milwaukee. Ukraine, sorry, that's an old habit from when that was what they said on TV for decades. Speak to the cops that actually, from the folks that honestly, even if they were misguided in many of their beliefs, did come from the point of view of protect and serve, right? Mm-hmm. And see if you can see if we can maybe do some influence in there, and maybe my brother pointed out this might be the way that you haunt ice, which may be true, but that was not really my target. It was like, how do you actively influence kind of everybody around that? Because those folks are often enmeshed kind of in a web of complicity that is hard to get out of, but perhaps their children have influence. And so perhaps their grandparents can reach out through them, sure, to reach out to them.
Perhaps they can be reminded of their vows to serve the Constitution, which
and this is a big one.
That people have taken vows to serve this, this Constitution, which is now being shat upon, so
shat upon. And so, and then day before yesterday, a friend suggested that, do you want to go to a local cemetery and make some offerings and do this process? And we did. And it was crazy fucking intense. So if you spend any time in cemeteries, the military gravestones that were put in by the military are very clear as to who was who and what war they fought in. And there's tons of other veterans in every cemetery, but they're not often easily found. But you can find those cemeteries, and once you see one or two of them, you go, okay, you can just look across the cemetery and see all of them. And so it's not hard. And so we began going around and making offerings and talking to these dudes. And it was very potent, which is not a thing I would normally say. I'm usually not that sensitive to that stuff, but there were a lot of immediate presence hits off of some of these folks. And some counter. There were some folks that were CSA veterans, Confederate, that were not super down, but we did it anyway, because it's like, no, like, is this specifically the thing that you believed? And I know that they're like, some perhaps speaking your language, but you can still shift this perspective. But they were mostly not interested, one was. And I hit one that, like, I just kind of walked, we saw it, and the person I was with went over to start making, some offerings of some foodstuffs. And I was in charge of the coffee, and I like walked over, and when I actually got onto the ground where this guy was buried, I like lost it and was just like sobbing because this dude had been carrying and is carrying like massive, like traumatic regret levels from the Indian Wars in this area. And so I did some work with him and will continue to do some work with him because he was like, once I got him, like, yeah, I recognize you and I recognize this and I can hear this and you can unload this on me, because I don't think he ever had anybody in life that he could unload on, because, I think he died in the 19 teens. And then I was like, this is what we need. This is what you can do with the other dudes who are in the ground. Like, something that not all of them necessarily know. And can you reach out? And so for folks who are looking for something on the ground that I think has got some practical application, you might experiment with that.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Last Veterans Day, I actually ran a thing to try to sort of call some of the folks that, like, from whoever wanted to participate. So I think there's a lot of people in our past who have fought against what we're seeing now. And I think that, like, there's a lot of momentum in the past to sort of like to draw on, I think. So yeah, I love that. Fuck yeah.
And then the other, do you mind me reading a few pages?
Oh, that would be great.
So the other one, this will go public, and I'll give you the links later to share. This is a public project that came about because my friend Danny shared a link with me that's kind of not super relevant, but it triggered this for me, and I was like, okay, here's a thing we can do. And this might change in language a little bit, but I think your people might find it useful. And so it's called After the Fall is the name of the project, and it's a black book project. So it's a hypersigil project. And this is what it says. It says, we're in a polycrisis. By this, we mean that there are many interlocking and inter-affecting messes all happening at once. Climate change, social collapse, wars. These are symptoms of a mad dash to solidify empire. The term we use here is an umbrella that includes things like patriarchy, colonialism, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and extractive, coercive, and abusive forms of industry and state, into straight-up authoritarianism and fascism. Currently, this is orchestrated by the ultra-wealthy and those who have or seek to have similar levels of power. These people have abandoned the belief that the human project is one of greater interconnection and co-responsibility for the earth and each other. They seem dead set on burning down the world with themselves inside, believing that their wealth and power will insulate them from the worst of it. This is accelerated, I believe, due to the knowledge that the changes we are experiencing will inevitably lead to mass migration as some locations shift from survivable to unlivable. The imperialist projects of empire don't want to address this. It's bad for the business of amassing wealth and power by any means necessary. They don't care about the planet or people. Instead, they dream of terraforming Mars while strip mining and deforesting the Earth. Fuck all of that. There's a ton of work to be done, boots on the ground, to resist this and to support and help one another. Mutual aid is the path to survival here, as it has always been. But a critical thing that is often missing in resistance is serious focused work to imagine a future where all of this is in the rear view, and we are living well in right relation with each other, the planet, and the others. After the Fall is therefore a group magical working using the methodology of the Black Book, a type of hypersigil I've written about extensively in Weaving Fate. The black book is a written on paper journal or diary. In it, you write of things you would like to experience, or in this case, the kind of world you would like to follow this moment. It doesn't ignore what is happening now. It sees the better days we're all living in after the fall of empire. And there's many more pages. We don't have to go into that right now. And so this will be like shared publicly. It's not going to be paywalled in Patreon, and it's, a share freely thing once the document's done. Because I think it's the thing you're not supposed to do right now. I think that's, if I were to look at what I see happening, is we're not supposed to be able to see beyond a very limited set of possibilities. And I think those of us that become aware of this, or this makes sense to, can actually seed kind of the collective unconscious with those possibilities. Because everything's dystopia now. Everything is, Mad Max meets Handmaid's Tale meets Plantation version 99, And so it's really just, what do you do when you can't do anything else thing? It's a way to regulate yourself and regulate your nervous system a bit. Because doing this kind of work, which I think everybody that would be listening here knows, your brain doesn't understand the difference between what you imagine and what it in any other experience that happens. Mm-hmm. And so you begin to see different possibilities into your own nervous system, in which then you co-regulate into other people. And so the more people we have who are kind of aware of this as a magical act, who are putting that oomph into it, to see kind of what's it like when we aren't fucking in tech bro warlord universe, which is what they want us to think is the only way. Mm-hmm. What is it like when we don't have the view that we must hoard everything at the expense of everybody that doesn't have it, And so that's the root of that project. And like I said, it's in process, but it'll be up by the time this goes live on my Patreon as a free post and on my website as a download.
Yeah, I love this idea. Very, very much in line with my own sort of philosophy about stuff. And fuck yeah, very, very cool. So maybe there'll be a way for us to share some of these little bits and pieces here and there in the show or something like that. I love the idea of trying to like broadcast this more broadly and get it out there for people. So very, very cool. Fuck yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so that's kind of my focus. And then, like we said, the Between the Worlds thing is the last piece that I've got, where some of this will be shared there, and some related stuff from the books that are in process will be shared there.
Okay, very cool. Well, Between the Worlds is going to, I guess we're kind of bookending back where we began. Between the Worlds.
Exactly. I'm just trying not to melt down about that, because it's like, what? I got to do this around lots of people in a hotel, fucking in Maryland? Jesus Christ, what did I sign up for?
It sounds overwhelming, but I'm sure it's going to be super, super cool. And
I think it'll be fun.
I'm sure it'll be super fun. And
I think I will sleep for about 3 weeks afterwards, but
fuck yeah. Well, let's see. Is there anything that you would like to touch on that I haven't asked you about yet, or that we haven't gotten to yet?
I think, we've hit a lot of it, but the only thing that I would put out is as things continue to degrade, and then maybe even once what's currently happening breaks, that wave breaks a little bit, there's going to be a major push to go back to business as usual. Mm-hmm. And it's really important for people to realize that for most people on the planet, business as usual has really fucking sucked, and we don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what we're looking at is literally like thousands of years in the making. And so we're also looking at a project of unmaking and remaking something else that is probably equally long. And so spending some time really thinking beyond your life, if you have kids or plan to, beyond their lives, to 5 generations, 10 generations, 50 generations down the road. What would you have the world to be there? And whether that's boots on the ground, whether that's magical work, begin working towards that, because somebody has to. Mm-hmm. And the systems that we're in right now are kind of, manifesting so many catastrophes that we can't look past today. And we really do need to pick that up from kind of functional societies of the past that really were like, in a lot of traditional cultures, reincarnation was a given, and it also happened within family lines. That's a really different way to view the world.
Yeah.
Like, if your children are going to be the people who make the world and to make the people that you are born into. And I'm not saying this is accurate, because I also think that those systems are intentionally created within those cultures. I don't think that that's just the way things happen. This is one of the things that is very commonly believed, is that, oh, it must always be just like that. And I think that that's a skill when that goes on, and our disassociation from our own history on land and lore of land and all that stuff breaks that. And so I don't know that it's going to happen that way. And I think for a lot of us, we're not riding that anyway spiritually. But yeah, what would you want to see? What would you want to be raised in from fucking cradle to grave every time you came back, if you knew you were coming back every 100 years for thousands of years?
Mm-hmm.
And really do that project. And that's really what this Black Book project is for. Like, get it solid so you can feel it. Because what we've got is mass kind of dystopic and dominator fantasies overlaid on everything. And we actually have, it's like, yes, they have to be undermined, but they also have to be replaced with something functional. And that can be beautiful. And that's not something that we're supposed to think.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to think that any move to dismantle what we have now will lead in, just infinite levels of hardship. And therefore, we must remain complicit to it. And that's not real.
Yeah.
It's one thing that could be real, but there's a hell of a lot of options other than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that another way that we could look at all this is through the lens of like abuse dynamics, like the idea that like an abuser might tell somebody like, well, I know you think that I treat you bad, but you wouldn't survive out there without me because like you're just too useless or stupid or whatever to make it on your own without me. And, this abused person might, really be locked into that mode of thought, and that might be their reality, even though it's not the actual situation.
Right. And that's one of the things that I think is really critical to realize. It's one of the things that's in both of the books, and it's in the presentations that I'll be doing, and it's in most of what I'm doing right now, is realizing one of the things that helped me to realize, I'll put it that way. When we look at what I call empire, and we look at it as related to abuse dynamics, that's entirely intentional. Mm-hmm. And so what I call empire is both the state gone haywire, and it is corporations run amok, but it is also the person in a home terrorizing their partner and their children. Mm-hmm. It's all the same sickness. It's all the same pathology. And again, in a functional society, this is something to think about. How do you imagine this would be where somebody goes, oh, that person is not well, and we see a lot of ceremonies in functional societies that are geared towards bringing somebody that has kind of become unwell in that way back into kind of right relation with people, land, spirit. And so that when we look at it and we go, okay, like, I believe empire in all forms basically runs on trauma, and it's the goal, which is the thing that I think is hard for people to accept sometimes, is that that's not a side effect. That's the actual goal, that they want you massively fucked up and massively dysregulated. And the more extreme your complex PTSD they can generate for you, the happier they are.
Yeah, the more easy you'll be to control.
You're very easy to control. And then also just kind of given the moment here in the US, where they're kind of like mass recruiting for ICE and things like that with massive pay bonuses and all of that stuff, Empire wants you like submissive and complicit. Mm-hmm. And so watch where you become complicit and fucking get out of there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
because
Yeah,
that is a horrible thing to try and extract yourself from.
just looking at the history of how like a lot of these types of organizations have gone, I would be very nervous to be a member of ICE, like in terms of like who gets purged after the first purge and
Oh
like
yeah,
things like
no, it's
that, you know?
horrible.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not comfortable, but if you know people that are in there, it's like, if nothing else, go after their sense of,
Yeah, I mean, you're
long-term survival
probably
and point out what
on
happens.
the docket for getting rid of once you're not useful anymore because you're kind of embarrassing and kind of a liability. So,
And it's
yeah.
also, if assuming unless this actually stabilizes in some form where you get to keep that job forever, you may not get another one.
Yeah. It's probably gonna, if history is any indication of what will occur, there might at some point be some trials that happen and stuff, and
Absolutely.
people are very upset about the fucked up things happening, and people are going to want to see some form of justice, which is different than revenge, you know?
Yeah. And it's that same thing. It's like it's always, and then again, it's like that complicity thing is really interesting. Is it's like, again, when we look at conditioning, like look at the ways that the media and then the kind of structures that get built as we go forward, if this continues for a while, which pieces are there to make you buy in on some tiny level
Hmm.
that it's okay?
Yeah.
Because
Or
that's
that
what
it's
the,
your fault. Oh,
or that it's your
we
fault.
shouldn't have talked so much about whatever pregnant people instead of pregnant women. That's what made these people go all psycho and turn into fascists. Like, no, it's not, it was not our fault that this happened. Like, stop
No.
victim blaming, you know? Like, yeah.
Yeah, because and all of that has to do with that idea of complicity. So I would say complicity is a critical thing to look at here, because that's how you get people that don't agree with you on board, is if you can get them to think that I or somebody else who is talking about the fascists has, if you now go, oh, I'm one of those people because of what I did over here, that's just as good as you being a true believer for them, because it's very difficult to look at those things in ourselves and accept them and go, okay, I was that. Perhaps in some way I did become complicit, and now I'm going to extract myself from that and do the best I can.
I think there is a sort of thing that for a lot of people, there's this kind of like maybe ego protective mechanism where it's like it can be very difficult to self-reflect in a way that allows for like growth through understanding like where one went wrong in the past and stuff like that. It's kind of like energetically intense and stuff, and it seems like a sort of like self-protective mechanism of like just not being able to like actually yeah get there in terms of owning that, but I think that even I've noticed with a lot of these types of folks there is still a sort of thing where it's we want the same things, our interests, our actual interests as human beings actually do align, and like where is that actually like not working anymore, like where are your interests not being served anymore, conservative person? And pointing
Yeah,
this out is a really good place to say like your interests are actually not being served here.
right. And I think it's again, it's kind of like what we're seeing now with this past week or so in Minneapolis is like such bad. It's so bad for kind of these powers that are trying to gain control, because they're actually not able to understand, I think, that people actually do have core values,
They
and
think it's
that,
all like they think that it's all just like foreign money is like making people like it's really really interesting, like they don't seem to understand that there are people who are philosophically motivated, right, instead of just
yeah,
yeah.
motivated by compassion and motivated by like understanding that what happens to my neighbor happens to me, and understanding that like I don't have to see you as exactly like me to be concerned about your well-being, you know? And they're doing a good job of driving those wedges that can begin to move the needle of who is willing to be kind of vocally complicit. And I think what we're going to see is that there's a core that will stay there but there's a lot that are looking for off ramps, and that's a hard thing for those who have seen this coming forever to accept. And this is especially if you're talking about family and stuff, is or friends, is that if you're looking for that kind of better future, we're going to have to off ramp a lot of people. And off ramping is not shaming. It's going, okay, cool. You figured out that you completely were clueless and got used.
It doesn't matter when you got to the place. At least we're all here now.
We're here now. And it's in a lot of cases, it's making it personal is very helpful at a certain point, but not in the way that often happens, which is the shaming thing is going, if you can kind of show people like you got used by these grifters, which may not be a thing you can do immediately, but that brings somebody completely out if they accept that, because they go, oh, I don't want to accept that. And so thinking you're necessarily going to get acceptance during a conversation of that is also not necessarily a thing that makes sense. But if that seed gets planted and then somebody looks at it and they see what they see on the television and go, okay, I know that's a lie. I know that's a lie. I know that's a lie. Okay. I may never be comfortable saying, yeah, I got used, but my actions may change quite radically.
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody, for whatever reason, is kind of hearing this and feeling like you're in that camp, yeah, no shame. We all come to the information that we have when we find it. And for whatever reason, we're happy that you're here. So, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit I did not know for a long time. And I lucked into, my education came from working at really good bookstores with a bunch of freaks from when I was a really young person who would go like, okay, you just said something really dumb. You should read this book. And me going, okay, I'm 16. I'm really dumb. I know it.
Yeah.
Hand it over.
And I mean, I feel like I always perennially want to sort of like be in that space. Like there's always going to be things about which I am super big dumb and big ignorant, and I want to always be sort of like, to stay curious, as I always say.
And realize that, like, one of the things that I think is really interesting, and one of the kind of visions that comes out of the tech bros in particular, and specifically kind of the tech oligarchs, is they act as if we don't know ways to do things differently, right? Like you look at like the education in the U.S. system in the U.S., public education system, they act as if they don't know how one would fix that when there's lots of places in the world that are not too different from us where they don't have these issues. Yeah. And all you have to do is be willing to wander in and go, hey, let's try this because it works for a bunch of other Euro and Euro diaspora folks, and they aren't as dumb as we are. And so
is it in the state's interest for the people to not be dumb, right?
And if it's not, then the state as a whole is fucked up.
Right? Yeah. So what kind of state are we asking about? Right? Yeah, totally.
And so then what again are we looking for? What's that look for? If you have kids or think about kids, we're talking about this kind of black book project. What's the perfect education that you would like to see them gain? Write about that shit. And then one of the things that's in this little PDF that I'm generating for this is like, and then use what you like are imagining also to see where those things are available or almost available or could be available with a very small push. It's kind of like that reality of the kind of hardcore right very smartly began stacking local government a long time ago. And though I'm not somebody that could do that for various reasons, there's a lot of folks that could do that. That's a job.
Sure.
A lot of people need work. You could get in on the library board or the school board or the city council or whatever. And it won't fix everything. And you're going to have a different kind of neurology than I do to do that well. But again, when we go back to the beginning of what we were talking about, what we're seeing right now is really this kind of world that Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and Jerry Falwell and all of those people kind of gathered together, which is, all at the hands of the Heritage Foundation then as now.
Hmm. Hmm.
They began a long-term project.
Yeah.
And we really have to do the same. And to do that, you gotta you also have to stop eating yourselves. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts with Tyson Yunkaporta lately. And in one of them, he said that kind of the primary issue, or one of the primary issues he sees among progressives, is this idea that every hill must be died upon, which is the best language I've found for that yet. Is like, if you're going in to fight over semantics with people that are on the same page with you, fucking take it elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Or keep it within the keep it within a friendly container if you're doing this for whatever jollies you like to get out of this. Yeah, it can be incredibly destructive and can really damage morale when people are nitpicking. People who generally agree about something are
And you
nitpicking.
can find people that want to argue with you if you want to.
Absolutely.
You don't have to involve everyone in that game, because not all of us care about that shit.
Yes.
So it's not hard to say, hey, this is what I think. Anybody want to fight with me about it? Do that. Person up. Be up front. I want to fight about the specificities of this thing.
We're fighting.
Who wants to go? Fighting is a legitimate art as long as everybody is there consensually. Absolutely.
Yes. There's nothing wrong with that taking place in the bounds of consent. So yes. Well, I'm trying to think if there was anything else, Oh, I did want to thank you while I had you here for being kind enough to welcome me to the part of the world where we are living and everything. When I first got out here, it was what I'm contextualizing as a super cursed move. Everything just fucking went wrong, and just shit was the wheels are really falling off and everything. So yeah, I really did appreciate your kindness in that transitory period. And yeah, and there was a gift you'd given me related to Santa Muerte, which ended up becoming sort of interesting and significant as a lot of ancestor work came up, and I was kind of coping with a lot of grief and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to express my gratitude for that while I had you here and everything. And and express my gratitude for you taking the time to hang out with me today, and for all of the other insights that you've helped my listeners and I gain. So thank you.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I was laughing about that. I was thinking about it when I was lighting that candle that I picked up that also for Santa Muerte, that it just sat for a long time, along with that other item the counter to the one that you have. And maybe a month ago, she was like, okay, let's go. And I'm like, okay. So
yeah, she kind of comes and goes for me, and yeah, she shows up when it turns out I'm going to need her. It seems like. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Aidan, thank you so much for taking the time today. Would you mind telling the listeners where they'll be able to find your work?
So I've written 3 books that are all available at bookshop.org and most other online places. I have a website at aidanwachter.com that is kind of just a greeting card. And I am active on Blue Sky, and I'm active on Patreon.
Awesome. Well, I will put links in the show description for all of that stuff. And are there any last thoughts or words of advice you'd like to leave the listeners and I with?
It's this is a really long project we're in, whether we want it to be or not, and it has been a really long project for a long time. And so for a lot of folks who are maybe just waking up to it, and it's all consuming in the moment, versions of this have been going on for a very fucking long time. And don't think you're going to resolve it all in a week or a month or a year. And personally, don't assume it's going to be resolved in a lifetime, because it's going to take generational willingness to change how we do business. to really get to the other side of what we're experiencing right now. This is just a particularly obvious and egregious moment.
I love it. Fuck yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aidan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, as always. It's been a pleasure over the many years we have done this now.
Indeed. Fuck yeah. Thank you. All right, thanks so much to Aidan Wachter for once again joining me. Check out the show description for links to everything that we talked about, and check out Aidan's books and Patreon. And if you liked today's chat, check out Aidan and my other conversations here on the show. Speaking of which, I wanted to open today's episode with the little piece I shared from chapter 23 of the book 6 Ways. Not only is it a cool and powerful set of affirmative statements, but I thought it would be interesting to offer the opportunity for a comparative analysis. See, I also opened episode 12, which also features Aidan Wachter with the same excerpt from 6 Ways. And that was before I did a lot of work towards, leading public ceremonies and experimenting with and developing my own practice involving the magician's voice. Listening back to that older episode, it kind of sounds to me like, comparatively, it's like a child is reading it. And rather than feeling like embarrassed or whatever about it, I'm sort of realizing how cool it is because I'm going to keep working on stuff. And maybe in a while, with time, the version that I read today will have a similar, immature ring to future me listening to it. And may it be so. We talked a lot in episode 12 about the idea that practical magic can be about becoming the person you need to be to have the stuff you want to have happen, or getting the skill sets that you'll need to do the things you want to do to have the experiences you want to have, or whatever it is. If you want to have the experience of traveling to a place, it would be good to figure out how to be the kind of person that travel happens to. What are the components that would lead to that? The title of chapter 23 of 6 Ways is called Playing the Long Game, and it sort of details how a simple, practical magic practice, like using things like sigils or whatever is accessible, can be built out to achieve sort of long-term personal development or life goals. And in looking forwards towards better and more functional ways of doing things and society, this stuff might be useful on multiple scales. But one thing that stands out to me as being a sort of key component involves organizing things in one's life to allow for more consensual spaces or more mutual respect and reciprocity. Aidan mentioned that people becoming sort of systematically traumatized is a feature rather than a bug with a lot of our current systems. In this fractal reality in which we live, when we decide to create things, they will often mirror the larger systems around them on a smaller scale. The way that a dictator acts towards the people in a country is mirrored on a smaller scale by the way that a domestic abuser acts towards people in the household, which I think was an example that Aidan offered during our conversation, and which does seem to be backed up by the people who study this stuff. And unless we're careful to add extra energy in the form of attention and intention, the things that we create might simply turn into smaller version of the things we're hoping to interact with less, perhaps. Like the way that a magical group can end up adopting a sort of like fundamentalist worldview that would be at home in any megachurch, for example. If we want to try to avoid the fractal iteration of the dynamics of power over, as opposed to those of mutual power with, we'll need to set things up in ways that will intentionally foster the conditions for feeling with, which is the etymological root of consent, to have one's feelings and intentions aligned together. This involves understanding the ways that all of us come to the table with different experiences and doing our best to make room for the different ways that we move in the world. It involves trying to understand the ways that structural and individual power dynamics can impact people's judgment and all kinds of other things, and making space to slow down, to have difficult conversations at times when they're going to be easiest for everybody, to understand how our own traumas and biases and other things like that color our lenses for looking at the world and trying to get a more clear picture if we can. And like so much of what we do in a magical or spiritual practice, this is a journey more than it is a destination. Consent is a shared experience that we search for together in the darkness, walking slowly and softly towards one another while listening to each other's voices. It's like the void, it's a liminal space that exists between us, a place of power where, if we're able to find it, meaningful and transformative work can be accomplished. And I want to thank the Consent Academy for their awesome work and for the Consent and Leadership course that helped me and so many others kind of put this stuff together. So if you're any type of organizer or hold some type of leadership position, or even if you're hoping to do so in the future or hoping to take more of a leadership role in your own life, I highly recommend the Consent and Leadership series of classes offered by the Consent Academy. You can find them at consentacademy.com. All right, some quick updates about the Green Mushroom Project, which is an ongoing group magical working based on the metaphor of the relationship that some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of the project, are like a forest of trees, the Green Mushroom Magical Current is the thing that connects and strengthens us and allows us to share resources and whatnot. And in addition to this idea of the mycelial web, there's also the concept of the mushroom spores, which are like little packets of the current's energy and are sort of more associated with the celestial realm. Green Mushroom Project's newest experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and organizing consent-centered magical spaces for group work, both in person and online. We've got lots of fun and free activities going on our little server, the Green Machine. You can join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats, as well as special events like ceremonies and seasonal celebrations. Shout out to Dave Audrey, who's been rocking some planetary sphere initiations. These are sort of guided meditations that people can take part in to get in contact with the different planetary energies. They're pretty cool. Thanks also to Barrett Cutie, who recently hosted a special presentation about digital security and privacy. There's some really valuable information in there, including a conversation about risk assessment, which I think would be useful for a lot of people in a lot of different areas of life, not just data security. Risk assessment is something that we talk a lot about in our consent work and stuff too, kind of figuring out what are the risks so you can sort of try to help mitigate them if possible and things like that. So definitely recommend checking that out. And that's available now on the Lux Occult YouTube channel. And right around the time this episode is going to be released, we're going to be rocking a digital ceremony for creating community protection salt, which people can also conduct on their own or with friends. I'm going to be leading some in-person versions of this locally in the near future, and others can also do that too if they want to. I'll put a link to the write-up of the ceremony in the show description so you can take a look at it and create some of your own enchanted Epsom salt. And I think we're also going to be recording the ceremony so that we can make a sort of listen-along thing, which might be more accessible for some people. Here's a little bit from the introduction, though. This ceremony was created with the intention of being an easy and accessible way for those interested in protecting themselves and their communities to create magical protection salt using inexpensive and easy-to-access materials. It can also be adapted as needed to become more accessible for anyone who wishes to conduct it alone or to lead it for friends and community members. The salt created with this ceremony is not intended to be sold but can be given away freely to anybody who might benefit from it. So, cheers! As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you in your life or your practice. It's been such an honor and such a privilege to be sharing this journey with you all. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or get me on Blue Sky at luxestrada919 for a link to that Discord server. This episode is already pretty long, so I'm going to save a lot of these for next time, but let's do a couple of listener mail and shoutouts. out and thank you so much to China Cat, and greetings to Adele Soto. Great to hear from you. And also to Michael M. Hughes, who I hit up to do some fact-checking for this episode. Stoked to hopefully chat again soon. Shout out also to Joseph on Instagram, and thank you so much for the kind words. And also, shout out and thank you so much to everybody who's been supporting the show in whatever form that takes, especially listening. Thank you so much for being here. If you like the show and you like what we've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me, which I do over the email. Making the show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it does mean a lot to me to be able to make it, and I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you so much to the people who are making the show possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all your friends, allies, frenemies, magical associates, and random strangers on the street about it, as well as everybody that you meet at the next choir rehearsal or anarchist collective coffee clutch or your kid's school play, the office Valentine's party, or a ceremonial potluck or a golf tournament. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is doing so. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button or whatever it is on whatever app you might be using, so that you can get updates when a new episode comes out. Do a nice little bookend here and share a little bit more from chapter 23 of 6 Ways with some final thoughts. And this is the final paragraph that Aidan has written of that chapter. Build an engine of your desires, your wills. Feed it constantly, and chant on all levels for them. Weed out false desires, those which are not really that important. Decide if those desires, imported from others or from your culture, are truly relevant. Keep them if they are, and take them to the altar and lay claim to them in the here and now. If they are not relevant, take them to the altar as well and let them go. Ritualize the letting go. If they persist, our parents' dreams for us are often tenacious and may have nothing to do with our own, for example. Clear them out. Take them into meditation. Ritually divest yourself from them. Own what is yours and walk away from what is not. Boost the signal of what you are and what you will be, and turn down the volume of all the extraneous noise. Fuck yeah, I think this is good advice that could be enacted with all kinds of different practices, whatever your deal is. Even if you're not a magic-y person, but you're just into like self-development stuff, you know, having a focus and an accountability to yourself is super important. But in times that feel super stressful, it can be a little bit more difficult to foster the space for yourself to focus on this stuff, to like focus on where you'd like to be going rather than where you're afraid that you'll end up, for instance. There are obviously always going to be real and actual material logistical concerns that need to be addressed, and I'm not suggesting anybody ignore those, but finding a little bit of space to fuel that machine of your desires rather than being distracted from them by fear. I'd like to offer a little snippet of some automatic writing that I did for the Sound Magic album Kleidakos. Kleidakos is, of course, one of the many glorious epithets of Hecate, and it means the one who holds the keys, the one who can open or lock any gate or door, or to start the ignition in any vehicle. Anyway, it goes like this. It's a machine that hasn't been built yet. It still exists on the periphery of my perception. But I will build this machine, and I will climb in, and I will transport myself in the direction of liberation. Here's a little snippet of the track Machina Abstracta.
It's a machine that hasn't been built yet. It still remains on the periphery of my perception. But I will build this machine, and I will climb in, and I will transport myself in the direction of liberation.
What will the machine of your desires be like? And where will this chariot carry you into the future? And those who come after you, where will it carry them? And as you ponder this, I'd like to share the Green Mushroom Project's statement of resistance with y'all as I remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Aidan Wachter for joining me. Don't forget to check out the show description for links to Aidan's work and a lot of the other stuff that we talked about here today. Gratitude to Hecate, The Void, and all of Team Unseen. Thanks so much for the kind support for the show and all my other work. Gratitude. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. Even in dark times, there are many bright lights, so shine on, friends. This is Lux Estrada reminding you to stay strong, guard your mind, and stay fucking curious. Alright, I'm going to leave you all with a little track from Music for Good, a mixtape for Minnesota Mutual Aid by Community Aid Network Minnesota. You can find it on Bandcamp, and this description is also there. This mixtape is a collection of songs from Minnesota musicians to support the work of Community Aid Network Minnesota. These tracks vary by genre and production quality, but all are shared with a deep love of our neighbors being affected by injustice. Community Aid Network is a grassroots volunteer-led organization located in the Bancroft neighborhood of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We work to build socially with our neighbors, organize volunteers, and redistribute resources to ensure everyone has the means for dignified survival. Alright, fuck yeah, what a cool project, and you can find a link to that in the show notes. Thanks so much to friend of the show, the Tom O. Bedlam, for giving me permission to share his contribution to the project called A Family Recipe. Cheers.
This poem don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Breath rendered to laughter, mixed with blood and bone. This poem don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Carry it under your tongue wherever you may roam. Take 3 words your mother said as you fell asleep in the crucible of your heart. Heat, heat, heat. Add the color of a wholesome well, clear and cold and deep, in your step and in your soul. Beat, beat, beat. This bomb don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Breath rendered to laughter, mixed with blood and bone. This bomb don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Carry it under your tongue wherever you may roam. Take the fruit of those seeds you planted row by row in the crucible of your heart. Heat, heat, heat. Mix it with your father's sins, for which he did atone. In your step and in your soul, beat, beat, beat. This bomb don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Breath rendered to laughter, mixed with blood and bone. This bone don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Carry it under your tongue wherever you may roam. Make a broth drawn from all of your wedding tears. In the crucible of your heart, heat, heat, heat. Let it age on child's time, one long golden year. In your step and in your soul, beat, beat, beat. This bone don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Breath rendered to laughter, mixed with blood and bone. This bone don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Carry it under your tongue wherever you may roam. This bone don't come from Gilead. We make it here at home. Hopes too heavy of a thing to carry all alone.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.